Okay, what I want to talk about today really quickly is transitions. And transitions are, well, most of the time, anything with technology, when you start to be able to, when you can do something, you don't always necessarily think about whether you should. And transitions are definitely one of those ones, and I see it time and time again. And honestly, when I first started video editing back in the 90s, and I actually opened up Adobe Premiere for the first time, it was brand new software at that time. I remember going really crazy with the transitions too, where I would just like use transitions all the time. I thought they were so cool, and there were so many of them. And you know what? I hate most of them now. And I really want you to kind of understand the place of a transition and what it's really for. And that is a couple of things. Most of the time, the number one thing that a transition's for is when you have a gap in time. So like you move, or a gap in place. So you're moving from one location to another. Or several hours have passed, or a day, or several days has passed in your story, and you want to do a transition. When you add transitions, they're found underneath the effects menu. So if you go to the effects menu, you'll see them right here, video transitions. Okay, there's also audio transitions. There's also a ton of video effects. We're going to talk about those later in a different demo. But you have your video transitions here, and there are, I mean, so many transitions, and they're all, most of them are ridiculous and very, very cheesy. And I really don't want you to use hardly any of them. The ones that you should be using most of the time are going to be under the Dissolve menu. That's really where I think you should stick when you're looking for transitions. And again, transitions generally happen when you're talking about a transfer of place or a transfer of time. Now, there is one other place where transitions can happen, and that is to make something that we call jump cuts happen a little bit easier. That's actually not the best. Here we go. So in this video, we're climbing a mountain, okay, and the kids were going up this one particularly hard place. And I was standing up there, and I literally had about 2-3 feet of width of there's a cliff behind me and a very steep cliff on, well, hill, but kind of a cliff on the edge. And so I'm trying to stand over here. They're coming up, and I'm filming it. And so for this, when I filmed it without the transitions, it felt a little hard. So let me just take the transitions here, and I'm going to delete that. I'll delete them all. And let's just take a look at this without the transitions, okay? There we go. So one, cut, cut. And it's not horrible, and we haven't changed place, but it is a little harsh. And jump cuts can oftentimes be harsh, and a lot of times jump cuts are supposed to be harsh. But I decided that I wanted to add some dissolves in there. And so if I just do that, if I just add the dissolves back in, let's watch the same clip again, the same series of clips. And these are all the same footage from the exact same movie clip. I just put different ins and outs. And then there's a dissolve, whoop, and it can't handle that. Hold on, there we go. So then it dissolves, dissolves, dissolves. So in a lot of ways, there I'm kind of breaking that idea where I'm saying, you know, transitions are usually for major changes in time or location. But what I'm doing there is visually I'm actually softening the cut between something that actually has a very similar camera view, a camera point of view, and similar motion. And so when I had those cuts, it was really harsh. Let's give an example of maybe some different ways of doing transitions here that might help understand it a little bit more. If I go back to, okay, so let's say I take, actually let's go back to where we're on the top here. Okay, so I'm going to take these shots here, and I'm I'm just going to duplicate them. Let's just take them to the end of the timeline here so that we can talk about how transitions work, and so you can do them appropriately. So let's just do that. I can get rid of my text here. Boom, see you later. We'll talk about text later. So here I actually have a transition that does exactly the same thing, where this boy, this is one of my sons actually, climbed up, and he was a little bit ahead of everybody else. And so you can see people coming out of the tree line here, and I didn't want to have the camera like on for the whole time where there was just empty space, so I decided to cut to the shot of everybody else coming up to the top. But again, I felt like a jump cut there was a little harsh, and so I wanted to soften it. That's an issue of style. But let's just say I wanted to do another dissolve here before I do this pan of the mountains from the top of this one mountain that we were on. So when you're doing a transition, the really important thing is to kind of visualize it like this. If I take these two, I'm just going to drag these two up to a top. What you need to kind of understand when you do a transition is what you're really doing here. So if I just take this right here to there, you're actually extending the first clip a little bit this way and the second clip a little bit this way. But you'll notice that they're not letting me do that. And the reason for that is I actually don't have any extra frames at the end of these two clips. So if I double click and then I scroll out of the end here, you can see, actually I do have some, so why isn't it doing that? I'll just add the endpoint there, so out, there we go. Not quite sure why these are not allowing me to, oh, probably because the audio is on different tracks. Ha ha ha, that's funny. Okay, there we go. So now I can extend this. So essentially, if I wanted to transition here in the middle, okay, I need to have enough frames to extend my clip, my original clip this way, and the other clip this way, so that there's actually a little bit of overlap. Now you don't actually see that happening when you add a transition, but I want you to understand that. So if you're using a clip where you're at the end of the clip, where you have no extra frames at the end, okay, you actually won't be able to do a transition. So let me hit undo here really quickly. So now we're back to normal, and if I add a cross dissolve here right on the transition, you'll see that there's a nice fade now between that shot, and you can kind of see it because the second shot starts to come in before the cut, right? So I have to have these extra frames ahead of the cut. And then the same thing, the first clip is still there, okay, after the cut. So I have to have extra frames after the cut. Let me show you what happens if I don't. So I'm going to take this clip and I'm going to slide it all the way to the end, okay? So now I don't have any extra frames at the end of the cut. And so if I try and drop the cross dissolve down, you'll notice it only goes on one side of the cut. It's going on the left side of the cut. Now this actually confused me for a while. But what it's telling me is that the clip on the right, the second clip, is the one that has the extra frames, and so it can extend the dissolve to the left, but it can't extend the dissolve to the right because I don't have any extra frames in the first clip. So what's going to end up happening is it's actually going to bring my cut to the left. It's going to try to. And I'm going to lose more frames from that first one and gain some frames from the second clip. So it actually tries to make some adjustments for you and do that for you. Essentially what it just did is it brought my cut over to about here, even though it's not showing that, and then it did a cross dissolve. So let's undo those. So that's really important for you to kind of understand, is you always want to make sure that whenever you're doing a dissolve or any kind of transition, you have to have those extra frames. The first clip has to have extra frames at the end of it, and the second clip has to have extra frames at the beginning, and then it will allow you to do the transition. Let's take a look at some really cheesy transitions, just so that you can kind of see them. Here's the iris diamond. Oh yes. Oh, and so we have to render that. So it's boom, hit enter to render those. Oh boy, I only want to render selected. Now of course I'm hitting cancel, and we'll see how fast it cancels. Okay, sequence, render. Oh, it doesn't say render selection. I don't want to render this. Anyway, I'll just go through without rendering it. So then you have this. That's pretty cheesy for the most part. You know, I mean, that's, And here's what, I mean, it doesn't work with the graphics or the visual. I mean, like, why is there a mountain coming out of that poor guy's head? Like, I mean, really, when you think about it, that's what I'm doing right there, is I'm making a mountain come out of his head. You know, so if you look at a lot of these transitions from a purely graphic or visible or art aesthetic, you'll realize that most of them do not work with your video almost all the time. So here's a page peel. Oh yes, this is one of the favorites. Oh, look at that. That's amazing. I'm sorry. Not that I want to make fun of anybody who's ever used these, because I've used them too, but they're just horrible. Okay, barn doors. Yeah, this is that one actually isn't so horrible, okay, depending upon what you were doing. A lot of it depends on the motion. It kind of works with this because of the motion of the second clip. If I was doing a dolly shot or something like that, where I was zooming in on something, it might work better. I don't know. You have to see. So that one's not horrible. This is one of my least favorite, the checker white. Okay, see that a lot. You'll see that a lot. That's very 1970s. Tarantino, I think, used that in Kill Bill. I forget. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, I've seen that used in films that were supposed to feel retro. They were supposed to feel like 1970s, where they had a lot of whip pans, a lot of, lens zooms and stuff like that. They've used that transition. But if you do that, you got to commit to it. Your whole video has got to feel 1970s. You know what I mean? Or else it doesn't work. You got to do the colors right. You got to do everything right, or else it just doesn't work. And there's just, I mean, I could just keep going. And these are all really horribly cheesy, right? That one's supposed to represent time. Star Wars used that a couple of times, and was probably the last movie to use that successfully. But anyway, so does that make sense to everybody? There's the how you do it, but there's also the why you do it, and that's really important. Don't shy away from just good old cuts. You know, I used the dissolve here to soften what we call a jump cut, okay? But then in my final version, I just cut from them straight to the pan of the mountains. I didn't feel the need to do a transition. The dissolve kind of works there now that I've done it, but I didn't see the need, you know, because there wasn't really a purpose. We weren't changing time, we weren't changing location. If all of a sudden we were moving to a different area or the time of day had changed, then maybe a dissolve would be perfect, or a fade to black. You know, like I said, stick with the simple ones. Get rid of all these stupid 3D ones, and most of the time, 99.99% of the time, if not 100% of the time, for this class, anything that you will do will be sitting in the dissolve transition folder. And that's basically it. And if you stick with that, you will probably be much happier and your videos will be really good. Lastly, it's kind of like this. I think the transitions can be a lot like, and this is I'm sorry, I'm a car guy, but this is just the analogy, can be like $2,000 rims on a $500 Honda Civic, right? If your video's not really all that good, then the transitions aren't going to help it. So if you've got a $500 rusty Honda Civic and you go put $2,000 rims on it, you're not fooling anybody. It's still a crappy Honda Civic that's rusting. Even though you've got really nice rims on it, you're not fooling anybody. But if you've got yourself a 1970 Plymouth Barracuda that's worth 6 figures, guess what? It looks good even if you've got the original 1970 rally-style steel wheels. You don't need $2,000 rims on it because the car still looks good. The same thing with your video. If your video is good, you don't need really fancy transitions because your shots are good, your editing is good, the pacing is good, you're good to go. If you need those transitions to make your video look good, then guess what? Your video work needs to be better. It has nothing to do with the transitions, okay? And timing is everything, and you can do all sorts of fancy stuff, but in the end, if it's a $500 Honda Civic, don't go putting $2,000 rims on it. Go get a better car, right? Okay, that's enough of that analogy. Let's get to work.